It sounds like through all your scholarship endeavors, the work of John Dewey and Ralph Tyler have really influenced this research. Is that right?
What was that again?
The work of John Dewey and Ralph Tyler have really influenced you throughout your
Did
research?
somebody suggest it might, or is this all me?
That's you.
Yeah, I'm no more a Dewey fan than others are. The only difference is that when I find out about what people know about Dewey, I find that they put it in their find out something and so on, because then you find it. But just as I said a little while ago, when he said that the research must go back to we're not going to write a paper for teachers. They're not going to read those papers. So what I'm going to do now in the next part of this, I'm looking back to Dewey. I'm looking at a series of people whose views for schooling were out there that they did it, that they actually, as philosophers, were concerned about our schools. And now we have Whitehead. And Whitehead, his little book, that all fallen apart for me out there, has a sentence in it when he talks about how angry he is for what's going on. So I'm going to take those all along, about those sorts of things that have been happening all along for the last 100 years, while we are gradually moving toward taking schooling out of the hands. What's the name of the person who got recognition and not recognition, who was the superintendent in Washington?
Oh, Crew?
She now has she's trying to raise money for things. She made the interesting observation, which I would make too, and she says now, if you look at what's going on in school reform, you never see the word child and you never see the word parent. What happened? And the parents think they're getting, and they aren't. And in a place called school, it's loaded with data that I've got pages of data that aren't in the book. I'm rediscovering them because we've gone backwards since I wrote A Place Called School. Mm-hmm. And furthermore, A Place Called School was accompanied with Ted Sizer's book, and I've forgotten the wonderful person, the other one, who the three of us, we all came out with these books in 1982, 83, 84, just as the commission was reporting at the same time. When I had finished that book, the education editor of the New York Times, he called me and he said, he went around all of the work that was coming along, where their place coming along, and he discovered before it was out A Place Called School, and he called me. And then, how do I get one of those books? And I told him they were in if he went to the storage place, he could get one. And A Place Called School got front page. When he said it was going to be a Sunday thing, he was furious and angry because he didn't get it. And they said, well, just put it out then in the weekly one. He said, I'm not going to put it out in the weekly one unless you give me the front page. He did have the front page, and he had talked to me every day for a week. That went out. Ted's book went out. The other one went out. There were three of them. And the educators looked at them and so on. But guess what? When I got the press calling me, they wanted to know what other dirty stuff I could give them about school. They wanted to know. They'd gotten the commission's report. The commission's report never really saw the right light of day because Reagan, he didn't know what that thing was all about. He came in the middle of it. He wasn't interested, but he managed to get persuaded by the Secretary of Education, the first one, I guess, that we had. And so what happened was that all of that collapsed. And I'm discovering that the stuff that's in these books are ahead of what we're doing now 25 years later. But there's a whole lot of newcomers along like you folks that now have got to, for those of us who were writing in the little book I was asking you about, those who dared, because this is a book on who were willing to put out something that was not kosher. And there are 5 of us? 5, yeah, like that. And they went out just about the time that Obama was coming on board. And so we thought we might be able to get that to him and all of that, but of course, like everything else.
So speaking of those newcomers like me, what advice do you have for educational researchers that are so-called in the trenches now in terms of these federal policies and state policies? What are we to do, in your opinion?
Let me come back to the teacher education question right there. And let me go back to your question about Dewey. Dewey wrote several letters to the trustees of the University of Chicago, just 1 or 2 was probably just before the 20th century and then into it. And what he wanted was to be able to have a department of pedagogy. His letters were not good letters. They were sloppy letters. I think that 2 things caused him not to get the approval of the president and the trustees. I think he thought, well, surely his reputation was such that he'd be accepted when he gets this center of pedagogy. He didn't want a center of pedagogy, a department of pedagogy. He wanted a department of education. The trouble was he already had a school of education that had been given to him from Chicago, preparing teachers. He did not like what the teacher education was at all. He thought this was junk. Wasn't strong enough intellectually. And the problem was that he had been named dean. So he was dean of what he didn't want. But he wrote, so he couldn't do a department of education. He already had a school of education, but he could do one of pedagogy. I think the combination of pedagogy and the quality of the letter he wrote killed it. And so very soon after that, he left and went to New York. Now, but you ought to see what it was he was after. And what he is after is in one of his papers that he wrote about 27, 28, 29. There's a book that you hardly ever see from educators. It's not the book. They write all about democracy. He did more than democracy. That's interesting. When the business of democracy came back, it's a little overwrite for me. Actually, my son has the best book on it because his took a whole lot of other people and wrote this book about democracy and how we were going down the drain. And he put some of the best statements. He has a PhD too, but he doesn't like academia. He doesn't think it gets adequately into the real world. So as we come back here now, what did Dewey do? I think what we really have to do with our leading educators, we have to seek a profession of education, which we don't have. And that profession of education is largely Dewey. And if you go to Dewey's, what he wrote in 1928 or 29, if we had gotten it, if it had been approved by the president and the trustees, I don't think we'd be in the mess we're in today. Because what he has done is made education the most interesting graduate program. It would have been in Chicago, which is one of the centers of intellectualism, if there ever is one. You probably know that there are more people who in America are graduates of Chicago than any other institution per capita. Okay, now then he came up with this thing, which is we're going to have this. Here was what we were going to learn, and we were going to get history. We were going to educate educators into education and not do what he thought was just teach them to teach. You can't do that. I mean, that is a personal thing that, look what I've given you. Have I looked at, I'm going to go out there and change teacher education and so on in this climate we've got up here? Waste of time. Instead, we ought to just forget about Obama and forget about Duncan, and we ought to do what is there. And then if we look at Alfred Lord Whitehead, holy smoke, put that and Toohey together, and you really got something, because now what he's doing is taking the child. This is my second one in this list. Now, by taking the child and finding out what it is that the children are all about, and to go there. And then now what he's done is he's, in his little book, has shown about a program that starts with the nature of children, moves to them and further, then, and what he's saying is we've only got it once. The child only goes through it once. And that's what we've got to look to. I think we ought to start coming out and getting this out there, but then saying, pardon the language, to hell with them. They may not take our school away because it's not theirs. Therefore, we say, no, we aren't going to close. We aren't going to take your 7%, anything out of your 7%. We're going to get this money from the parents who begin to understand what it is we're doing. I think to do anything else than this is not going to get us anywhere.
You use the terms, well, wisely, I think, renewal, and juxtapose that with reform. You have the Center for Educational Renewal up here.
Yeah.
Is that different than reform?
Oh, yeah.
How?
Oh, very different. The word renewal, I mean the word...
Reform.
See, I even dropped it. I hate it. So.
Yeah.
Well, what is it, the other one?
Reform.
Reform. Look in the dictionary for reform. Reform is some people doing something else. We're going to reform you. That's what we're doing. So it means we've got people who don't understand trying to reform us. So reform is a nasty word. Now then, you look at renewal. Okay. You look at renewal and look what we've got in the school. By and large, and this is oversimplifying, but we've got teachers the way they were when I was principal for a brief period of time in the school. I didn't know anything about being a principal. I shouldn't have been a principal because they had a teacher in the school who would have been a far better principal than I. But interesting. It was a small school. In the morning, the teachers came in. Because I was the principal, I had the room nearest to the door where they came in, so the teachers would come in and go to their rooms, and they would say, good morning, good morning, good morning. End of the day, good night, good night, good night. So I think, well, they know, this is kind of interesting. We got problems in this school, and a lot of them we ought to be working at. Oh, no, that's my problem. So I think, well, let's get together. So we get together, and I called a meeting, and they all came, and they were all women, and they all had their bags under their arms before we started. They weren't about to do this. I didn't have the ability to change it, and if I'd tried to, they'd tell me to blow it. Don't do it. We're not interested. Okay. So, but what renewal is what Tom Bellamy is working on so much now in the Goodlad Institute. And that is what he's doing, and he's doing with the pieces. I tend in this great big stuff, and he's coming pouring in, is that now it took a long time to people understand what I was saying with renewal. And when we were doing this, spending this $55 million to improve teacher education and not ending with very much, when we were doing this, I thought, holy smoke, I'm going to send out occasional papers. That's where that started. So what I did was I sent it out there, and it happened that a teacher education group thought it was for them, and they didn't like it that others were getting on these papers, and they wanted it was theirs. So I said, they're not mine. Take them out and dump them all over Seattle if you want to.
Sure.
Okay. And so that is renewal is you're getting better and better and better. Are you going to get better and better all by yourself? No. You're going to come together as a school. And I've got research on it. We go back to California. Back to California, I decided that we ought to work with a group of schools in California to make it possible for them to renew. And so a colleague and I went to the superintendents of schools in the state, and we got 20, I think, schools to agree to work with us, and for their schools to learn to be able to change their schools themselves and so on. We would help them for 5 years. When we got there, lo and behold, I got a grant adequate enough because I was at that time director of a component of the Kettering Foundation. By their request, even the president at UCLA wanted me to do it. Coming back to this thing, I jumped. What was I just saying? I must be getting tired.
That's fine. With the renewal and the reform.
Yeah, with this renewal component, I put that out in the air. But this time, what we did was we brought principals, taught the principals how to go about working with their teachers to make the school better. The principals met with me once every month. We had somebody available to them to work with them who we thought had more ability along these lines than we did, and who would raise questions and so on. And the principals would try to get those people to handle the teachers. And we told those people, don't you dare. That principal is not going to get you to do anything about your teachers. You're going to answer questions and so on for them that might help them raise questions about what they're doing. Well, then what is it? What's our problem? What are our worst problems in this school? Mm-hmm. We're coming together as a faculty. What are our worst problems? So we talk through. Sometimes these may be very simple. Somebody has a desk that doesn't work right or something. Okay, let's fix them. We talk about them and fuss about them, and let's fix them. So we'd go to that. But, okay, now then, you're going to fix this. How are we going to do that? So we talk about that. Then we come to saying, okay, let's try it. Let's try it. Mm-hmm. So we try it, and then we come back and say, how are we doing? And you see the teacher is really getting, this is okay. So instead of teachers going home and saying good night or coming in, what soon happened in those schools? I'm with the principals, as I was for a full day every month, and one of the principals was missing. And after we had been together for a couple of hours, this principal comes charging into the room, breaks up our meeting entirely, and said, you know what happened to me last night? When I was leaving the school last night and asking and talking about the principals and concerned about why they were out, they were at 5:30 or something in the afternoon, they told me to go home. You want to come and join us? No? Well, then go home. And he said, that's what they told me. So we spent a time on, was anything wrong with that? Mm-hmm. Who was in the right or the wrong for this? So I discussed with them these kinds of principles. Okay, now then, you've got that far, and you go on, and then you discover, boy, we'd like to find out what some other schools are doing. So it's nothing, it's common sense. There's nothing difficult here, but you know what? With that bunch of papers I sent out all over the place here. I was having that the professor and the people in the schools and the teachers and so on saying, we don't understand you. And I'm just dumbfounded. I got over and over and over to meet in person with these persons because they didn't understand something as simple as you take care of business. That's all you're doing. Mm-hmm. You're taking care of the business of the school. It isn't the principal's responsibility. It's the principal's responsibility to get you taking this school with me. And don't tell me that it's none of it, that you're not going to do it. It's my fault. We've got to do it together.
That sounds very much like the way that you served as the dean of UCLA. Is that right?
I'd say so.
I'd say so.
You'll find the same themes all the way
Yeah.
through.
Jianping Shen, your former student, he acknowledges that you always have renewal projects at the ground level of everything you do in terms of your research. And
Who's saying that?
Jianping Shen, your former student.
Yes. Oh,
And Dick Clark, he has also worked with you at the Center for Educational Renewal.
he sure has.
Yeah.
Dick has cancer of the liver, and they can't stop it.
Oh, that's,
He
I did
he
know that.
has a few months, but guess what? He's still at it.
I know.
I still hear from him. He wrote something for people who were concerned because he was busy every day, and I wrote a piece regarding what Dick and I had done for 25 years, and he wrote back, and they began to understand what this is all about. Okay.
He says that you both share a mutual frustration with what you both see as inexcusable malpractice by policymakers and educators who are shaping schooling today. What do you see as the most frustrating about America's schools today?
I think the most frustrating and most worthless is we've got to now turn around slowly and get the parents to say, we want to know what it is you're doing, and this is what we're doing, and they want some agency. Mm-hmm. Gary has written the best article on this I've seen. You know, Gary got the award as the outstanding 25-something educational philosophers in the world. Mm-hmm. And what he's done, interestingly enough, goes all the way back to when I appointed him to take care of the teacher education program. Mm-hmm. And now he's back to he's not in education now, he's got other things he's doing, but he says in this paper that the agency has got to be the closest to the child. And what we've done is to move the agency away from the teacher, away from the principal, and now things are coming down to them about things that those people don't know. They don't know what this child needs. They don't know, saying about renewal, for example, preparing the problem is one of them, is when the children are placed into the classroom, the teacher has to know pretty soon that child is half deaf, and therefore she doesn't have them up in the front, in the back of the room. She has them in the front of the room. So what it is we've got to get the parents say, we want to know what it is we're doing. Are we preparing children for this? Or are all we doing teaching math and science or whatnot? Or what are we doing? My research shows that they're only doing a third of what they should be doing. But that's not their fault. The fault is that's what the Secretary of Education and the state do. That what is going on should not be in the federal government at all. They should be seeing that the schools are doing that, mm-hmm. not trying to do it themselves.
Mm-hmm. So you at the end of the day, you're really focused on community building, moral imperatives at the schools, partnerships, how these people work together, including colleges of education, to Renew Schools. Is that right? That captures pretty much everything you continue to do on a daily basis. So what's next for you? You have held many leadership positions, including the director of the Center for Teacher Education at University of Chicago, dean, of course, at UCLA, who brought the graduate education program there to one of the top in the country, director of the Center for Educational Renewal at University of Washington, and of course, you're president of the Institute for Educational Inquiry here in Seattle. You have received honorary degrees from more than 20 universities. You received the first Phi Delta Kappa Award for meritorious contributions to education through research, the Medal for Distinguished Service from Teachers College Columbia, the Distinguished Contribution to the Curriculum Field, and the Award for Distinguished Contributions to Educational Research from the American Educational Research Association. You've received multiple awards for contributing most to educational reform in the United States, awards for contributions in teacher education as well, multiple awards for teaching and service, the Brock International Prize, Outstanding Achievement Award from the John Dewey Society, and you were named as one of the 50 modern thinkers of education. This is just to name a few honors that you've gotten over your career. 30 books, 200 articles, and 80 book chapters or encyclopedia entries, a member of the National Academy of Education since 1979, and actually a founding member. You've served as the president of the National Society for the Study of Education, the American Association of Colleges of Teacher Education, and also AERA. So, when you reflect on your overall career, where do you believe you have had the greatest impact on our field?
The last time I was at a meeting of the American Educational Research Association, quite a few people came. A colleague of mine, he was a student at UCLA, Ken Tai. He was first a student of mine, except that I pushed him over to where I thought his interests were more, because he was more in administration than I am. And Ken put that thing together, and these people came in, and several superintendents, principals, maybe a teacher or two, came in to tell me that maybe 40 years ago, and then on until Lynn and I came to the Northwest, and I knew I had to do something about going elsewhere, because it's not fair. I felt it wasn't fair for a dean to go back into being a professor because he knows too much about his professors. It's not fair. That's the main reason that we left. And the faculty was upset with me because they wanted the usual kind of stage, and I said, no, I'm just walking out of here. I don't want a great big thing, this, that, and the other, because I think you've got better things to do. Okay, now the interesting thing, and it happens all over the place, is, and this was, I had a whole, got to remember, this is not me. This is just a whole bunch of people, like the people I had for that business of all of those 20 principals who were going to now become renewing. And they said, all of them, I still remember those wonderful days. Some of those teachers, now you got to remember, I've got, let's say, Ken Tai. These people, these aren't me. These are people who are doing it. And these teachers, there were when we would have a meeting, the teachers for the daytime, they sometimes couldn't get release from their school, so they went anyway. And they would just get another friend to handle their principal. They were going. And they would come down together, and they would be talking about their problems together, not having somebody else do it, not going to a speech, going in there and talking about what they were doing, what they wanted to do. Those people said that they were still remembering that, and as a new superintendent came, or this, that, or the other, gradually those freedoms drifted away. And that isn't necessarily the fault of the superintendent. The point is, the superintendent, the trouble is that we've got to start telling school board members that they aren't experts. They don't know. What they've got to do is find out what a good superintendent is. Dick Clark, Dick Clark went all the way up heading for a superintendency. He applied for a number of them. I was told, I didn't know him then, back earlier, that there were members of the school board who thought he was too smart, and that they were running the school, not someone like Dick Clark. I don't know the story that occurred then, but then it came to a point where Dick quit trying to be a superintendent and discovered that the real important thing is to be the second man, because then he had the curriculum, the teachers, he had all that, and the superintendent is fighting with the board and dealing with the politicians and so on. So that's what Dick is talking about when he talks about our coming together. When we did this, Dick was still deputy superintendent, and as we were getting started with our work there and creating the Puget Sound Educational Consortium, lo and behold, Dick was there with us because that's what he really wanted to do. So I've got too much mixed up together here again, too many things falling together. And you're talking about the most satisfying thing for me.
Your greatest impact.
The satisfying thing for me was seeing people get that kind of enthusiasm with the teachers and so on. And the 5 people that are in Carl Glickman's book, Those Who Dared, we all were with those places that we were doing research, or they weren't doing research, but if you look at this, that little book shows all the way through that, for example, in New York, what happened to that school with that person who was bringing it along, and then trying to expand it in New York, and then later trying to expand it in Philadelphia. Who stopped it? People at the top. And so they were losing. The responsibility was still here, but that was a responsibility. But here were the people up here who had the agency, and that's what Gary has written about so well, and saying we've got to get that as close as we can to the child, the teacher, and the parent. That's where it is. But we've gone upside down because if we go back to Taylor, Taylor is saying and wrote, we've got to get thinking out of the workplace. He wrote that.
Yeah.
And there's a wonderful, funny little book. Do you remember the little book on the motorcycle? Back there was this motorcycle where this fellow who was working on a PhD in philosophy at the University of Chicago, but he was fighting with the professors all the time, particularly one of them, and so he decided to take his son and go across the whole of America. Well, what this fellow did was, in this, he has fought Taylor by saying the place where you've got to have the people who are thinking are the people who are doing the work. Right. But instead, we've moved that authority up there. So getting rid of that and turning that around would solve so many problems.